You're listening to Liberty USA, sponsored by County Citizens Defending Freedom. As an American, you have freedom flowing through your DNA, and we are here to help educate, empower, and encourage you to stand for your freedom.
Sarah Calamucci here. I have Santiago Avila Jr., also known as the Constitutional Conservative, where he hosts a podcast called Hispanics Lead Right with a listenership of over 25,000. He's the founder and CEO of Elevate Florida, a Florida-based consulting and marketing firm with local and state clientele. Santiago is of Cuban and Mexican descent and was born in Chicago. He is the first registered Republican in his family, and since then, many of his family have walked away from the Democratic Party. Santiago, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Sarah. Good. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. Thank you. So we had the pleasure of meeting you a couple weeks ago at a local meeting here in Lakeland, and we were very happy to see you and glad to have you here for one of our podcasts. So you mentioned that your grandfather's struggle against communism and what America offered. Tell us a little bit about your background.
So as a kid growing up, you know, we sometimes hear our grandparents telling us these stories, right? And as kids, we get bored and we're like, oh my goodness, another story time, and we have to sit here and listen. But as you grow up and as you start getting these life experiences, you start noticing that there is a reason why your grandparents told you, like, hey, you know, if the government's giving you something for free, it really isn't free. There's some attachment to it.
Right.
And that's something that I learned a lot from my grandfather. My grandfather was anywhere like near a religious person. He wasn't a very emotional type of guy. He was always very like strong and very dry, is what I tell people.
Okay.
But I can always tell my grandfather was happiest when he was around his family. You know, he almost barely smiled, but if I wanted to grab a bottle of shampoo and just make his hair go up in spikes, he would let it happen while he drank his Lone Brown, which was a beer from back then. But he used to tell me the struggles that he had in Cuba. He used to tell me specifically, there was a conversation him and I had one time, because I went to school and I got out of school and I was wearing these little beads. Back then, a lot of us kids, to make some money, would create little flags out of beads. And I always wore a bead that had the Cuban flag on. Mm-hmm. Of course, my dad got mad because, you know, I'm also half Mexican. So, but my grandfather, he took me to the side and he said, why are you wearing a Cuban flag? You're an American. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't think anything of it. I was like, because my mom's Cuban. He's like, but you're an American. You have no idea that you were born in a place where you have all these freedoms that are yours. The government didn't give you a piece of paper and said, Santiago, you're born a free man. That's not the way it works.
Right.
So he used to tell me all these stories about how he tried to leave Cuba on a raft, on different type of tires, on boats. And then finally his protest against Fidel Castro was so much and it was so apparent that he was actually in prison for over 10 years in Cuba. He was a political prisoner. Then I guess Fidel decided, hey, we're going to let all the political prisoners along with the rapists, the murderers, like all the real bad people from the prisons, and we're going to just give them to the American people. And they came here, right? And I always tell people, you know, that my grandfather embodies the love that immigrants have for this country. People don't risk their lives crossing a border, or not that I'm from open borders, right? But people don't risk their lives crossing that ocean because America has a bunch of racist people.
Right.
And that's a narrative that the left is pushing, right? It's a narrative that we get ingrained in us. You turn on Univision and you hear it all the time, where Republicans don't care about, you know, what's happening in schools. You know, our Governor DeSantis just signed a bill, and has nothing to do with what they're saying, but they're pushing the narrative. So it was a struggle for my grandfather, adapting to a new language, adapting to working and being a mechanic. Because in Cuba, a lot of people, they go to school, they become all these professions, doctors, all these things, and then they come to America and things are very different.
Right.
But the one thing that I can tell you that I learned from my grandfather is that America offers something other countries don't, which is equal opportunity versus equal outcome.
Right.
And that's very important.
So this is what you were starting to go into a bit, and that was when he did escape Cuba, that was the El Mariel escape. So when he got here, what was he in Cuba? What was his...
My grandfather was so many different things. You know, I always used to ask him, and he's like one of those, he's the typical
jack of all
trades. Jack of all trades and like professional most of none. But it's because Cuba, you really can't make any money. You know, everything is given to you by the government. You have free healthcare, free education. Mm-hmm. You have free everything. You just don't have freedom.
Right.
Right. But Sarah, I want you to think about this really quick. So my mom and my grandma one day told me the story right after my grandfather had passed away, a few months afterwards. They told me the story of that passage in El Mariel in the middle of the night. It was a boat. They said the name of the boat was called Oriola. And there was about a capacity of about 50 to 60 people on the boat. Well, the boats were not allowed to leave unless they had a minimum of at least 100 people on those boats. So the boat was already over capacity. So they were saying it was the middle of the night. My mom remembers very clearly that she saw a lot of dolphins swimming. At least that's what my grandfather told her. She now knows there were sharks.
Okay.
She saw that the waves were going up, and she would see like a little light, a dim light from far away from other boats. So then an ocean wave would come in, and then the light would just disappear. And these were people that the boats were just being destroyed by this storm in the middle of the night. And, to think that you would risk your family, $3, a son, and a wife, to come to a country that you don't know their language.
Right.
And you're being received, this is historical, you're being received by people with signs that say, speak English, leave this country. I mean, it's difficult, right?
Right.
But I think where you see people's resiliency is that you simulate to becoming an American, right? Because you can go to Canada, you can go to Europe. You really don't become European, right? You really don't become English or British or Russian or whatever country you're going to talk about. But you can become an American.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I love it. So you talk about being born with national rights, being known as the constitutional conservative. What does that exactly mean to you? Wow.
So story behind that is I was at an event with Chris Ann Hall.
Okay.
She doesn't like when I tell the story, but it's fine. She was doing a seminar for the Volusia County Teenage Republicans.
Okay.
Not trying to throw a plug, but there's a plug. She started asking questions about how many freedoms are in your First Amendment. And I was the first one to raise my hand, and I was like, 2. I'm never wrong. She literally gave me this look. It was a look of like a mother would look at their child, and she's like, man, sit down. The next person, please think about what you're going to say before you do. And then she was like, there's 5 freedoms. Don't even waste your time. I'm never going to forget that. Now, I didn't feel humiliated. Don't get me wrong. But that made me study a lot more.
Sure.
It made me study. It made me realize, wow, if the First Amendment has 5 freedoms, how many freedoms are in the other ones? Like the Second Amendment, everyone's like, oh my God, it's a freedom to bear arms. There's 2 freedoms in there, so there's multiple. But it goes back to my grandfather, right? So coming to this country, giving me these stories, these arguments, I'm never going to forget about this election. And I think you heard this part already, but it was a non-controversial election here in Florida with Bush and Gore. And I started doing some research because Bush sounded like something we kind of would relate to versus Al Gore when it comes to principles, right? And I ran into a gentleman by the name of Ronald Reagan, I guess because his father served as his vice president. And the more I heard Ronald Reagan's speeches, the more I was like, wait, Republicans are not for the rich and Democrats are really not for the poor. Republicans believe in family values, traditional values. They believe in small government. They believe in, taxation is theft at the time. Versus Democrats, they believe in things that are not what Hispanics really, believe in. So I presented that to my parents. Of course, somehow they thought I needed an exorcist in the beginning. But I started realizing that our Constitution is just so much more than a piece of paper, right?
Right.
I started realizing that people don't understand that the Constitution doesn't grant us any rights. It doesn't. If you read the Constitution, it says that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, which amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Right.
So if our Creator, if
Yes.
God is the one that endows us or gifts us with these rights, then what does the Constitution do? So the Constitution is there to protect our rights, to make sure that government knows when they are literally going too far,
Right.
when they are treading on our rights, when they are infringing on our rights. And that's what the Constitution is all about. And that's what I started learning, right? And the more I read the Constitution, the preamble of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, I just realized that God in his perfection, I mean, in a certain way, I feel like that document was an inspiration by him.
Absolutely.
Because it's a document that was written by flawed men, mm-hmm. and it's very flawless in everything that it does. It's one of the oldest documents that has been very successful.
Right.
So many try to imitate it and add their little pieces of this and pieces of that, but they fail to realize that where we're successful is that we recognize that the rights are from our Creator.
Right. And when they come from God, they can't be taken away by a government. The government's there to protect them, not to give them.
Exactly.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay. So some Americans believe socialism is the answer. What would you say to them?
So the other day about 2 weeks ago, I had a conversation with this lady that just came here from Cuba. She was, I always ask somebody when they come here from a different country, because that's how I start my conversation. That's how I break the ice. I asked her, why did you come from Cuba to America? And her answer was very telling, and it kind of opened, I guess it kind of opened my vision up to things that I didn't think about in the past. Maybe now because I'm a father, now I think about this.
Sure.
But she said that she was looking at her brother, she was looking at her dad, and she realized that I believe her dad is a dentist or her brother, one of the two, but they're both in the medical field. They make about $50 a month each. Her ex-husband is part of the military, but they live normal, right? Mm-hmm. They don't live well off. They don't have to pay rent. They don't have to pay anything. But she told me she realized that one day looking at both of them, they didn't have anything. Like, they had no future. What can you grow up desiring to be? You can't be an astronaut. You can't be a business owner. And she looked at her son and she said to herself, well, my son's going to grow up to be just somebody that's going to be sitting around drinking coffee in the morning and probably making $50 a month. And if you think socialism is the answer and you want that here in America, just think about here in America, we have the opportunity to be whoever we want. You can come from any country, do it the right way, and you can become a millionaire. You can become a billionaire. Doesn't matter. You can just be middle class if you want to.
Sure.
You can also be a beggar in the streets if that's what you choose to do, right? Because you don't want to work or whatever. But you have so many possibilities, Sarah, to be anyone. Who is it? LeBron James, right? Not that he's my favorite player, because he's not, but he went to high school. He didn't have to go to college.
Right.
Could he have done that in another country? I don't think so. So if you think that free medicine, free education, free everything is the solution, then instead of making America Cuba or Venezuela, I suggest that just get your stuff and try it out. Go live in those countries. Go to Venezuela, where you can see literally a mountain of paper cash on the sidewalks being swept up, and people are just not picking it up. Why? Because a gallon of milk is worth so much more than what's out there in the streets. It's not, their money is not worth anything. If you really think that socialism is the answer, we just had a trial run of it with COVID.
Right.
What did that do to people? child abuse was on the rise, spousal abuse was on the rise, drug use was on the rise, suicide was on the rise, domestic violence. I mean, I can go down a whole list. I don't do it because I try to be very positive about everything, but I don't neglect that we had some of that. Thank God we live in the free state of Florida, where it hit us less, but we still had a taste of it.
Yeah.
I know friends that lost their businesses,
Absolutely.
restaurants, because they couldn't open. So if you guys like socialism, it's not that we're trying to be rude or, oh my God, we're racist because we're telling you to leave the country. No, I'm simply telling you, try it out. Do a test run, see if you like it over there. And then when you come back, I promise you, you're going to come back a hardcore capitalist.
Sure.
And when I mean capitalist, I'm not talking about these people that believe in corporate welfare and things like that. No, I'm talking about somebody that believes in equal opportunity, not equal outcome.
Right. I've seen a picture that depicts it beautifully, and it's a lion in a cage, and he gets fed his meals every day. Everything is given to him, and then a lion out in the wild in the savannah. And which one would you rather be? He has to go get his own meals. He has to do everything for himself, but he's free. So it's an interesting way to look at things. It can sound beautiful to have everything given to you, but when it doesn't come with freedom, that's an expensive price to pay.
It is.
For sure. So what would you like to leave our listeners with today?
I think the most important part is that a lot of us that were born in this country, sometimes we fail to realize how blessed we really are as Americans. So I always look at the immigrant, the person that comes here, the person that does it the right way. My wife she's an immigrant from Ecuador. She came here legally. She did things the right way. She had to wait a long time because there were so many other people that didn't do it legally that were kind of jumping the line. So for those of you listening that think Hispanics only care about immigration, that is such a false narrative, because we care about like family stuff. We care about business. That's what we care about. But what I want to leave you guys with is, when you look at these families that are coming to America, right? And you look at people across the world, what's happening in the world stage today. You have Russia invading Ukraine. You have China flying their planes over Taiwan, kind of waiting patiently to see what's going to happen so they can try to take Taiwan back. You have Iran bombing our embassy in Iraq, right? When Ronald Reagan said that America is that shining city on a hill, he wasn't acting like, oh my God, these Americans think they're the best. He wasn't acting like that. We really are that last hope on earth.
Right.
You don't see people crossing the border to get into Mexico, or you don't see people crossing the border to get into Canada. If there's no America left in this country or in this world, no America, where would people go?
Right.
Where does hope start? Right now, even with the crazy war that's happening right now, as much as we have a president, whether you voted for him or not, that is not doing anything, people are still looking at America for hope.
Right.
And if we allow that light that shines very bright for many others to dim and turn off, I don't know what's going to happen to this world.
Without that beacon.
That's correct.
Well, let's hope that light continues to shine bright and regains its strength. So thank you so much for joining us today. I want to say that to learn more about Santiago, you can visit santiagoavilajr.com. And thank you so much for being here, for joining us today on Liberty USA. And remember that freedom is in your DNA. Thanks.
Thank you.